On the night of October 31st, 2020, Sergei Koveev whispered to his wife that he was going on a journey the next day. He said that he was heading into the mountains to find the meaning of life. He didn't tell her exactly where he was going, but promised he would come back soon. And on November 1st, he got into his car and drove for hours to Abkhazia, Georgia. He relied on maps and documents he found online from explorers. When he finally arrived at the location, he was welcomed by a huge, gaping hole that seemed to consume light and exhale darkness. But what happened next? Stick around to know the complete and absolutely interesting story of Sergei Koveev's cave exploration. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, subscribe now. The Veryovkina Cave. The Veryovkina Cave is the deepest cave on Earth, plunging at a staggering depth of 7,257 feet. To put that into perspective, you could stack two Burj Khalifas inside and still struggle to see the top. Located in the 𝗔𝗕𝗢𝗨𝗧 mountain range in Abkhazia, Georgia, the area boasts four of the world's deepest caves. Veryovkina Cave is not only the deepest, but also one of the trickiest to navigate. Planning a descent usually takes months and involves a team of experienced cavers. No one has ever attempted it alone since the cave's discovery in 1968. Solo caving was never a good idea, and besides, exploring the Veryovkina Cave in groups was always more enjoyable. The cave houses about 6 camps where cavers can rest, refresh, eat, and socialize before continuing their journey. To descend the 7,257 feet typically takes about 3 to 4 days, and another 3 to 4 days to ascend. Sergei Koveev's discovery and the arrival at the cave. 37-year-old Sergei Koveev first learned about the Veryovkina Cave from his village in the Velsky district of Russia. He discovered that the latest expedition had been in September 2018, carried out by Veryovkina caving team, who had reached depths of 6,900 feet. However, a flood forced them to abandon their mission after only a few days of exploration, but hearing this bad experience was not enough to scare the Russian. As an adventurous man, he was athletic from many sports activities, and he had recently taken up spelunking as a hobby. He had been struggling with existential dread and was searching for something to give his life meaning. The discovery of this cave filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. For months, Sergei studied the cave and made preparations. By the time October 31st, 2020 rolled around, he was ready. As he lay in bed with his wife that night, he told her about his trip to the mountains to find the meaning of life. He didn't reveal exactly where he was going, but promised he would return soon. On November 1st, Sergei got into his car and drove for hours to Abkhazia, Georgia. Typically, any group planning to explore the cave would need official permissions, but he hadn't bothered with that. He relied on maps and documents he had found online from past explorers. When he finally reached the cave's entrance, he was greeted by a large, ominous hole in the ground surrounded by rocky cliffs. The entrance was dark and menacing, revealing nothing of the depths below. It was hard to believe that this was the opening to the world's deepest cave. But the entrances of most caves are like this, so Sergei wasn't discouraged at all. Dressed in camouflage overalls and trekking boots, he tied a rope to one of the rocky projections. He took a deep breath and began to lower himself into the abyss using a lattice descender. The darkness seemed to swallow him whole as he descended into the unknown. Inside the cave. Sergei Koveev had read that the first 13,000 feet of the Veryovkina Cave were extremely challenging, so he proceeded with great caution. The descent was mostly vertical, but he had also wiggled through tight horizontal tunnels on his belly, climb over rocky blockages, and swim through cold, muddy pools. Eventually, he made it to 1,247 feet down, where he reached the first camp. Exhausted but relieved, he checked his phone to confirm he was in the right spot. He was. Smiling despite his fatigue, he changed out of his wet clothes, ate some food, and rested for a few hours. He found gear left behind by the Veryovkina team, who had abandoned their supplies in a hurry during the flood. Sergei took what he could use and prepared to continue his descent. His screenshots indicated that the next stop, Camp 600, was about 200 meters away, or 1,969 feet from the cave entrance. This section wasn't as grueling as the initial descent, but still involved wading through muddy water, squeezing through tight passages, and navigating rocky obstacles. When he reached Camp 600, he was thrilled to find even more supplies left by previous explorers: gas for cooking, food, and even a makeshift toilet. He also discovered sleeping bags, which he gratefully used to rest. In the constant darkness of the cave, he knew he would have to rely on his exhaustion to tell him when it was time to sleep, especially once his phone battery died. Instead of continuing his descent the next day, Koveev stayed at Camp 600 for a week. No one knows why he stayed so long. It could have been the cold, or maybe he needed more time to improve the plan. Eventually, he resumed his journey to the next camp, 3,280 feet from the entrance, known as Camp 1000. The unwanted twist. After a week of rest, he felt recharged and ready for the next leg, but as he reached 2,600 feet, the temperature dropped and he began to shiver. Without a wetsuit, he was constantly soaked by the freezing water. At this depth, the temperature was between 4 to 7 degrees Celsius with 100% humidity. He could have turned back or returned to Camp 600 to look for a wetsuit, but he pressed on, hoping to find something at Camp 1000 to help him combat the cold. However, Sergei also realized he had a bigger problem. He had forgotten to bring clamps or stirrups, making it impossible for him to climb back up. His only option was to continue downwards. Fingers crossed, he made his way to Camp 1000, his most challenging descent yet. He reached the camp exhausted but relieved. Unfortunately, his relief was short-lived. There were no wetsuits, stirrups, or useful supplies to help against the cold. Frustrated, he searched through the camp, cursing his luck, but found nothing. Defeated, he collapsed in despair to catch his breath. While resting at Camp 1000, Koveev had a desperate idea. If he could reach the fourth camp at 4,430 feet, he might find some climbing gear there. Even if he didn't, he had nothing left to lose. Determined, Sergei continued his descent, but as he dropped further, the cold became unbearable. The freezing water drenched him continuously, making his teeth shatter and his limbs shake uncontrollably. The rope became increasingly difficult to hold. At 3,600 feet, he reached his limit. He couldn't move his hands or legs to attempt another climb, and his fingers were too numb to work the descender. He hung there, exhausted and freezing, hypothermia setting quickly, and within minutes, Sergei knew his time was up. He abandoned any hope of survival and drifted into a deep sleep, one from which he would never wake. Outside the cave. Sergei's wife was accustomed to his solo trips, usually lasting for only a few days, but when weeks passed without his return, she officially reported him missing. 9 months later, on August 3, 2021, a group of speleologists discovered a rope at the entrance of the Veryovkina cave. This was highly unusual and dangerous, as it could tempt inexperienced people, especially children, to venture into the cave using the rope. The speleologists followed the rope down and found Sergei's decomposing body. Using the phone found on him, they identified him by uploading his picture to Lisa Alert, an app for locating missing persons. His wife was notified, and the Russian prosecutor's office was contacted for permission to retrieve his body. A team of 100 climbers is assembled for the mission, but they quickly realized the reeling Sergei's body up on a stretcher wasn't possible due to the cave's depth and complexity. Leaving his body in the cave wasn't an option, as it could contaminate the water that flowed from the cave to a spring in 𝗔𝗕𝗓, which the villagers drank from. Additionally, Sergei's wife had requested his body for a proper burial. The team had only one solution: to dismember the body and bring it up piece by piece. With his wife's permission, they began their descent on August 12, 2021. The team spent several days carefully retrieving his remains, and on August 16th, they successfully brought the body to the surface, completing the daunting task. While it was supposed to be a mere adventure for Sergei, the exploration had cost him his life. In the search of happiness in this world, the poor man unfortunately ended up getting into a sleep that he would never return from. So that was all about today's video. Tell us in the comments, what do you think would have happened to Sergei's life, apart from the clippers that he forgot to take with him. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and make sure you've subscribed to our channel so you'll never miss any of our haunting yet exciting videos.